Someone else who is not quite convinced about the depth and resonance of the superheroes is friend of the show Tom Holland. Here he is being asked about the origins of superheroes by his BFF Dominic Adventures in Time Sandbrook on the Rest is History podcast.
Now, I know that you don't really buy all that, do you? Amazingly, for once,
Amazingly,
I don't see them. You don't see them as Christian.
I don't really think it's anything to do with Christianity. I don't really think it's anything to do with Greek myth or Norse myth or anything like that.
After comparing them with 70s cartoon costume addict Mr. Ben, he goes on.
I mean, I think that basically that's the level that superheroes operate on. These are essentially, it seems to me, vigilante figures.
Yeah,
they're bred of the very specific circumstances of kind of American history, attitudes towards social history, attitudes towards policing, attitudes towards the individual picking up arms to defend the American way of life. Mm-hmm. And basically, these are people who are cosplaying. They are characters that may well, you may well get Thor, you may well get Wonder Woman drawing on the Amazons or whatever, but we're not in the level, say, of Tolkien with his fantasy.
Yeah,
clearly drawing on a deep knowledge of ancient literature, ancient myth, Christian myth, whatever, to amplify his world.
Well, I'm glad that Johnny Tolkien gets a shout out. But I wonder whether we just need to point out that there's an artwork distinction. Comic books aren't epic fantasy novels. Either way, the episode is a splendid conversation about the historical influences of comic book superheroes. The challenge is that Holland and Sandbrook are historians, and so the scope of their study is, of course, the historical antecedents and direct provable influences of the comics. They include insights about the particular cultural neuroses of the times which inspired them. It's honest work, and we're thankful that they take the time to share their discoveries. The trouble is, it's not sacral enough. We'll come back to this, but for us reformed mythologists, starting as we do with the creedal convictions that God is eternally Father, Son and Spirit, that he's the creator and sustainer of the universe, that this God made man in his image, that in the person of the Son, this God entered human history through the incarnation, suffered, died and was buried, but rose again, ascended into heaven, and that this Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead. For us, questions about superheroes are inescapably theological, because all comic book writers, cartoonists and filmmakers are made in the image of God and live in his world. Before anyone thinks we've totally jumped the shark repellent, we might also draw a line to the enduring impact of these superheroes. Once we've whittled down to the few from the many, why do so many writers continue to return to superhero characters like Batman? Well, there is that. We should also mention at this point that Batman is technically not a superhero because he has no superpowers. He hasn't been bitten by a radioactive bat. He doesn't hail from another planet, and he's not a mutant. He's just a billionaire with a score to settle and his own R&D department. How does it begin? How does Batman begin? How does Batman Begins begin? We turn our clocks back to 1939. We're in New York City with two men called Bob Kane and Bill Finger. It's important to remember Bill Finger because his name appears less frequently. Bob Kane gets all the plaudits, but Bill Finger was there to lend a hand. Thanks. When Bob Kane first imagined Batman, he gave Bill Finger a ring. Yes, that's right. So Kane was working on a Batman character called The Batman, and Bill Finger knuckled down to assist. Okay, I'll stop now. The very first appearance of the Batman, with a hyphen, comes in 1939 in Detective Comics number 27. But by the time Kane and Finger had thought of his origin story in the spring of 1940, we see the sacred truth. The legend of the Batman, who he is and how he came to be. These 2 pages will explain everything. One night some 15 years ago, Thomas Wayne, his wife and his son were walking home from a movie. What is this? A stick-up, buddy. I'll take that necklace you're wearing, lady. Leave her alone, you. Oh, you asked for it. Thomas, you've killed him. Help! Police! Help! This'll shut you up. The boy's eyes are wide with terror and shock as the horrible scene is spread before him. Father, mother, dead. They're dead. Days later, a curious and strange scene takes place, and I swear by the spirits of my parents to avenge their deaths by spending the rest of my life warring on all criminals. As the years pass, Bruce Wayne prepares himself for his career. He becomes a master scientist, trains his body to physical perfection until he is able to perform amazing athletic feats. Dad's estate left me wealthy. I am ready, but first I must have a disguise. Criminals are a superstitious, cowardly lot, so my disguise must be able to strike terror into their hearts. I must be a creature of the night, black, terrible, As if in answer, a huge bat flies in the open window. A bat! That's it! It's an omen! I shall become a bat! And thus is born this weird figure of the dark, this avenger of evil, the Batman. What's key here, and with other superhero origins too, is the simplicity of the mythos, the basics of their backstories. There are only a few ingredients, but they're so full of mythic material that they continue to provide us with new dishes. We could turn to the psychological and suggest that it's all in our collective unconscious. Of course we could, but why does Batman work where others don't? We make a return to Holland and Sandbrook.
I mean, Batman is created, what, a year later? Bob Kane, who's actually, Robert Kahn, another Ashkenazi Jewish writer, Bob Kane and Bill Finger. So that's Detective Comics in March 1939. Now, Batman is slightly different because he
doesn't have a superpower, does he?
No. So he really is the Scarlet Pimpernel in Gotham City. He is a rich, feckless aristocrat, or somebody who appears to be that, i.e. Bruce Wayne. And even the Christopher Nolan films have that element to them.
His parents have been killed by muggers.
Right, and becomes a vigilante. So obviously that's you can see that as reflecting anxieties about crime and all that sort of stuff.
And a huge question.
Yeah.
Why does he dress up as a bat?
Why bats lost away?
Bats frightened me. This time my enemies shared my dread.
Batman has meaning for us because bats have meaning for us. Have you ever thought about why bats exist? The weirdness of bats, the fact that they hang upside down, that they use echolocation, and then of course there's the cultural symbolism of the bat, their gothic connotation. What's more, the nocturnal fear. Why would the late rock opera hero Meatloaf have 2 glorious albums called Bat Out of Hell? One of which may have been the first album I ever bought. And what's more, the diseased bat was an early origin story for the COVID-19 The diseased bat was an early origin story for the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course it was. Its gigantic wings like a shroud covering the nations, enfolding the earth, blotting out the sun. Now, the zoologists might argue that bats are misunderstood creatures, and that most of them are kind and gentle. But this is all irrelevant to the rationale for the origin of the Batman. So we return to those opening 2 pages of the Batman comic #1. Those 12 glorious panels. It tells us why Batman chose the bat as his symbol. The historical or socio-economic explanations that Batman is a right-wing fantasy, a fascistic response to crime, are nowhere to be found. No mention of echolocation or other zoological insights. No, what we actually see is remarkably religious, solidly sacral. A boy kneels by his bedside, hands clasped in prayer, making an oath. He trains both mind and body for the task before him. Years later, as he seeks an identity to symbolize his calling, he ponders the superstitions of the criminal world and is confirmed in his dark disguise by an omen. The bat is where it's at, people. There's no reference anywhere in the text to the rise of fascism, relevant though that may be. There's no mention of the Great Depression, though the economic atmosphere might well have played a role. These things are imported from outside. My dear brothers, Holland and Sandbrook, exegete the text, see what's actually there. We can pontificate about what inspired Kane and Finger to write comic books about fighting crime, but we must also ask Bruce Wayne himself to give an account. The story recorded for us is that the orphan boy Bruce Wayne turned to prayer, that criminals are superstitious, but that the Caped Crusader sees spiritual significance in a bat flying through a window. Let the story stand on its own terms. Kane and Finger wrote a comic about a hero, but as Sandbrook concludes, they didn't know they were coming up with a franchise.
But that's how all of these comic books work these days. Yeah. I mean, they're seen as very kind of lowbrow kids' entertainment. So obviously they're ripping off things left, right and centre. And of course they get away with it because no one thinks at the time they're creating franchises that will last the 21st century. They just think this is disposable pulp fiction that will be, almost instantly forgotten.
There we go. And look, I got through a whole superhero bit referencing Tom Holland and didn't once mention that he shares the name of